I never imagined something like this could happen to me. If I could go back, I'd tell myself, don't ignore the signs. Don't make the same mistakes. It all started on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October. The kind of day when the sun paints. The backyard gold and the wind smells like dry leaves and faraway fireplaces. I was in the sunroom folding laundry, half listening to a daytime talk show playing softly in the background. Life had grown quiet since my husband passed away. Too quiet. I never said it out loud, but sometimes the silence felt heavier than I could carry. My daughter, Carrie, had gotten married young, just 22, to a man named Michael. At first, I wasn't sure about him. He seemed too polished, too smooth. But over time, I warmed up to him. He was kind, thoughtful, and always respectful to me. Maybe even a little too perfect. If I'm being honest, I started noticing things I shouldn't have. The way his eyes held mine during small talk, how he chuckled at my dry jokes even when they weren't funny. Back then, I told myself it was nothing. That Thursday, Carrie called to say she'd be late getting home from work. Michael was stopping by to pick up a package. Could I let him in? Of course, I said yes. I didn't think twice. I made some tea, threw on a cardigan, and waited. When he arrived, he had that warm, easy smile. His coat smelled like the cold outdoors, cedarwood and something faintly citrus. He stepped inside, and we chatted a little, just about ordinary things. Then as he turned to go, he paused. Something I've wanted to say for a while, he said, standing in the doorway with his hands buried in his coat pockets. I looked up from my teacup. What's that? He hesitated, and I saw something shift in his face. Maybe it was doubt, or maybe something deeper. I think about you more than I should, he finally said, his voice quiet. I probably shouldn't say this, but I can't stop. You're unforgettable. My breath caught. I felt my cheeks flush, my fingers tremble. There was a long silence. I should have laughed it off, told him to leave, called Carrie something. But I didn't. I just stood there, my heart pounding, completely thrown. It hit me then how long it had been since someone looked at me like that. Michael. I began, but the words didn't come. He stepped forward, slowly, like he didn't want to scare me. I don't mean to disrespect you, or Carrie, he said. I know how this sounds, but I see you. You're not invisible, not to me. And then he left. The screen door creaked shut behind him, and I was left standing in the stillness, tea cooling in my hands, the steam curling into the air like smoke. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because it was scandalous, but because something deep inside me had been touched. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that kind of attention. Not for romance or physical closeness, just the feeling of being seen, of still being a woman, with thoughts, emotions, and desires. Not just a mother, not just a widow. I told myself it was nothing. A moment of weakness on his part. Of course I wouldn't tell Carrie. That would only hurt her. For what? A few. Words spoken and gone like a puff of smoke. Still, a quiet part of me, one I wasn't proud of, wondered if he'd ever bring it up again. And he did. It was a week later, at Carrie's house. She was running late again. She often did. Michael offered me a glass of wine while we waited. I said yes, even though I rarely drank. We sat on the back deck, watching the sky turn orange and lavender as the sun went down. For a while we didn't speak. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when someone has been around long enough to know when not to fill the air. You seem different today, he said, glancing at me. Do I? I asked, taking a sip of wine, my skin feeling warmer than usual. You seem lighter, happier, I smiled. Maybe I am. Another pause. The breeze carried the scent of leaves and distant backyard grills. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and then quieted. "I wasn't imagining it," he said suddenly, turning to face me. "What I said last week. You felt something too, didn't you?" I wanted to deny it, to close the door and lock it tight. But something in his voice, soft, gentle, almost pleading, cracked something in me. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." He didn't move closer, didn't touch me, just looked at me with those steady eyes and nodded. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. "Especially not you, or Carrie. But I can't lie to myself anymore. There's something here." His honesty broke me open. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of my husband's memory, in the quiet space of motherhood, in the background of life. And now here was someone not only seeing me, but wanting to know me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the old house creak and the clock ticking on my dresser. Every option felt like betrayal. But then I asked myself, what about betraying myself? How long had I denied that I still longed for closeness, for someone to really be with? Days turned to weeks, and our moments continued. Not in scandal, but in subtleties. A brief touch of the hand while passing a plate. A hug that lasted just a beat too long. Conversations that drifted into things unspoken. I began to feel like myself again. Not the girl I was decades ago, but the woman I was now. Weathered, wounded, but very much alive. Surprisingly, I didn't feel as much guilt as I thought I would. What I felt was more like awakening. The turning point came on a rainy Sunday evening. Michael stopped by with his toolbox to fix a loose cabinet in the kitchen. Carrie was out with friends. I made coffee. We sat in the kitchen, watching the rain draw lines down the windows. The silence between us felt thick with everything we weren't saying. "You deserve more than just memories," he said at last, his voice rough, full of emotion. "You deserve to be cherished." And right then, I let myself cry. Not out of sorrow, but because I hadn't felt that kind of honesty in years. We didn't cross any lines that night. Not physically, but something real happened between us. Something I couldn't and didn't want to undo. A slow unfolding, a careful peeling back of layers. One ever spoke of love, not yet, but it was there, growing quietly in the space between words. I began to write again something I hadn't done in years. I started walking each morning, taking care with my clothes. My hair not for him, but Becca's. I had remembered how to care for myself. Of course, things couldn't stay hidden forever. One evening, Carrie noticed something in the way we looked at each other. A flicker of suspicion crossed her face. She didn't say anything then, but the air shifted. I knew a reckoning was coming, and I wasn't sure I was ready. The following week passed like the slow turning of pages in a heavy book. I found myself moving through my days on edge, my thoughts tangled like yarn in a drawer. Every word I spoke to Carrie felt like a test. Every glance from Michael loaded with too much weight. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things that Carrie hadn't noticed. But a daughter knows her mother just as a mother knows her child. There's a quiet intuition between us that runs too deep to ignore. It was Thursday again, the day that had started everything. Carrie had invited me over for dinner, just a simple family meal. She was trying a new recipe she'd found online, some herb chicken that filled the house with a comforting scent. As I stepped inside, Michael was already there, setting the table. His sleeves rolled up, his eyes finding mine the moment I entered. Smiled, the polite kind to give to a stranger on an elevator. Not the one he used to offer me. That smile, asterisk. His asterisk smile was gone. Dinner was strange. Dinner was strange. The kind of strange where nothing was actually wrong, but everything felt off. Carrie chattered more than usual, asking too many questions, laughing too loudly. Michael stayed quiet, letting his wife's energy carry the meal. I tried to act normal, but I could feel my hands shaking as I passed the salad bowl halfway through. The meal Carrie excused herself to get dessert from the fridge. Michael reached across the table to refill my wine glass, and for the briefest second our fingers brushed the air shifted. I looked up, and so did he just then, Harriton holding a tray with tiny glasses of panna cotta. She paused in the doorway, eyes flicking between us, that intuition flaring up again. The next day she called, "Mum," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" My throat tightened. Of course, say as something changed between you and Michael. I froze. The silence between us, stretched headlong and thin, she filled it. "It's just he looks at you differently lately. And you, I don't know, maybe I'm imagining it, but something shifted." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't lean it outright, but I couldn't tell her the truth either. "Not all of it, you're not imagining things," I said finally, my voice soft. "But it's not what you think, it's complicated." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what I think, I just know something, Sha. And it scares me." I wanted to reach through the phone and hold her to tell her that everything would be okay. But I wasn't sure that was true. Later that evening, Michael called me, not a text, not an email, an actual call. "I think she knows," he said, voice heavy. "She doesn't know everything." I answered, "She doesn't have to." He said, "It's enough that something's off." I sat in my darkened living room watching the glow of headlights pass across the window. "We need to stop," I said. A pause. "Do you want to stop?" He sked. "I don't know what I want anymore," I admitted. But I did know. I had to see I wanted him, and I hated myself for it. The next few weeks were a blur of awkward visits, careful words, and heavy silence. Scary kept inviting me over, as if trying to prove that everything was fine, but the tension hung between us like a fog that never quite lifted. One afternoon, Michael showed up at my house unannounced. "I had to see you," he said, standing in the doorway with rain soaking through his jacket. "I feel like I'm losing my mind." I let him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped like he was afraid to touch anything. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he looked at me, eyes tired and full of something like sorrow. "I never meant for this to happen," he said. "But I can't keep pretending that I didn't care about you, about what we had or have a no." I whispered, "Neither can I." He reached for my hand, just resting his fingers on mine. No kiss, no embrace, just touch, a quiet, aching gesture that said more than any words, and I felt it again, that deep, warm hum beneath my skin, the reminder that I was still here, still capable of feeling of longing. "Don't want to hurt Carrie," he said. "Neither do I, but I also don't want to live half a life anymore." His words sat between us like a death at night. I didn't sleep. I sat in my bed with a cup of tea, staring at the framed photo of my late husband on the dresser. I remembered the way he used to brush my hair behind my ear when I read at night, the way he smiled when he poured my coffee. He was a good man, but he'd been gone for years now, and I had become something of a ghost in my own home. Michael had reminded me I was still flesh and breath and soul, but the cost of that reminder was becoming clear. 2 days later, Carrie showed up at my door. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside to let her in. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't been crying. "Not yet." I asked Michael. She said. I asked him what's going on. My heart futed, and he didn't lie. She said not really, but he didn't deny it either. He said, "You two understand each other in a way he's never understood anyone." She looked at me then, not with anger, not with betrayal, but with something worse, a disappointment. "I don't even know how to feel," she whispered. I reached for her hand. She let me take it. "I never wanted this," I said. "Not like this, but it happened," she said. "Yes." She stood up, wiping her eyes. "I need time," she said. "I don't hate you, but I need space to figure out what this means." She left without hugging me after the door clicked shut. I sat back down alone with the storm of consequences I had helped create. I didn't call Michael that night. I didn't write, didn't answer when he texted. I needed time to decide what I was willing to lose, and what I was willing to fight for. I had known was only the awareness that something inside me had changed forever. The house had never felt so still. After Carrie left that day, the silence settled into my bones, echoing louder than any argument ever could I walk it through the rooms like a stranger, running my fingers along the edges of picture frames and empty vases, noticing dust where I hadn't before. Even the wind outside felt quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't hear from Carrie for a week. No calls, no messages, the absence cut deep, sharper than I expected. When you raise a child, you always believe your bond can withstand anything, but some wounds don't bleed, they just quietly bruise deeper. Then you realize Michael texted once saying, "Miss you. Are you okay?" Stared at the screen for a long time before finally typing risk, "No. But I will asterisk, I didn't send it. Instead, I went on walks. Life still moves forwardy. Clean the attic," I started. Cooking again, not just my craving leftovers, but really cooking meals with flavor and spice. And thought something about working with my hands grounded me, reminded me that life still moved forward. Even when everything inside me felt stuck, it was. During one of those walks an early morning with dew on the grass and a chill in the air that I ran into an old friend from church, Ellen. She was walking her dog and greeted me with a warm hug, and that signature tilt of her head she always used. She knew something was off. "You look thinner," she said, concerned. "Everything all right? I've had a lot on my mind," I said honestly. I want to talk. I surprised myself by nodding. We sat on a bench near the duck pond sipping coffee from her thermos. I didn't give her the whole story, not names, not details. But I told her enough that someone had come into my life unexpectedly, that I had made choices I didn't know I was capable of, that my daughter was angry with me. And rightly so. Ellen listened. Without judgment, she didn't scold or advise. When I finished, she looked out at the pond and said, "Life's messy, than people let on love even more so." I could have cried from the relief. "Can we meet it?" Conversation gave me just enough strength to face the next day, because that afternoon Carrie called her. Voice was cautious, but not cold. "Can we meet?" We chose a small cafe downtown, one we used to go to when she was in high school after her dance recital. The smell of cinnamon and fresh pastries hit me as I stepped inside. She was already seated, 2 cups of coffee on the table. She's still how I took mine. We talked. At first it was light work, weather, small things that tipped around the larger weight between us. Then finally she took a deep breath and looked straight at me. "Do you love him?" I didn't answer. Immediately I searched my heart, afraid of the truth and afraid of what a lie might cost. "I don't know if it's love," I said, "but it's real, and it matters." She nodded. Slowly her fingers toyed with the handle of her cup. "You were always more than just my mother," she said after a moment. "I knew that, but I didn't want to think of you as someone who still needed that kind of connection. I didn't think I needed it either," I admitted, until I realized how long I'd been pretending not to. Tears welled in her eyes. She brushed them away. "I'm angry," she said, "but I'm also sad because I don't know what this means for any of us." "I don't either," I said, "but I'm her. And I'm still your mother." Nothing changes. That we left the cafe with a hug, brief but real, not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of something softer than resentment. That night I sat in my kitchen sipping tea, thinking about everything that had happened, about the man I had grown to carry for in ways that defied reason, about the daughter who still held a piece of my soul, about the woman I was becoming. Somewhere between the past and the future, I picked up my phone and dialed Michael. "Hi," I said. When he answered, his voice came through warm, surprised, hopeful. "Hi, I want to see you," I said, "but I need you to understand something." "Anything," he said. "This isn't about escaping the life you have or running from your marriage. If we move forward, if there's to be honest, it has to be real, no more hiding. And if that means walking away, we walk away. But if we stay, if we explore this, then it's with open eyes." There was silence on the other end. Then slowly, "I understand you want that too." We met the next day, not in secret, not in shadows, but in the open, a public park. A sunny bench, just 2 people figuring out who they were and what they meant to each other. He told me he had spoken to Carrie too, that they had had a long, difficult conversation, that they weren't sure what came next, but there was honesty now and pain, and made the space for healing. I don't know what the future looks like. Hesed, reaching for my hand gently. Neither do I said. But I'm not that night afraid of it anymore. That night, I slept through the night for the first time in weeks, not because everything was perfect, but because I had chosen to stop hiding from my own heart. I was no longer a ghost in my own life, and neither was he. Winter came early that year. The first frost arrived in late October, dusting the grass with silver, etching delicate patterns on my windows each morning. It was the kind of cold that clung to your bones, but inside you something warmer had taken root. In me, not passion, not fantasy, but something far more grounded: acceptance. The days passed slower, Carrie, and I accept and spoke more often though. Never for too long she asked about recipes again, sent photos of her new throw pillows, and once even asked me if I needed help with the gutters. That was her way of extending an olive branch, not in words, but in gestures. I accepted each one quiet, like a woman accepting rain after drought. Michael and I were careful. We saw each other in daylight, met for coffee, or walked in public gardens, always aware of the limits of our time, fragility of what we had. There were no declarations, promises, just the deepening comfort of being understood. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't presenting from his marriage anymore. He was standing still, listening, and so was I. Own afternoon in mid-November, he brought me a book. It wasn't wrapped, but it was clearly picked with thought. A worn hardcover collection of poems by Wendell Berry, one of my favorites. He remembered. I found it at a used shop, he said, handing it to me like a confession. Made me think of you. I held it in both hands, the scent of old paper rising from its pages. I opened to a dog-eared poem and began reading aloud. The words sat between. It's like something sacred. When I looked up, his eyes were damp. You make me feel like I matter, Hesed softly. I reached across the table and took his hand. You do. It wasn't about agenamore or guilt or right and wrong. It was about presence, the kind that doesn't vanish in a storm. We were two people who had stumbled into an emotional intimacy neither of us had expected, but both of us needed, and in our own quiet, careful way, we were letting it unfold. Of course, there were days of doubt, nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, thanksing if I'd ruined my daughter's trust forever. But every time Carrie called, whether it was to talk about work or a new recipe, or just to hear my voice, I knew we were still finding each other. Slowly, we were building a new foundation. Shaky buffiness. Then came Thanksgiving. Carrie invited me. She said it like she wasn't sure I'd say yes. You don't have to come, she added. I just thought you should know you're welcome. I'd love to, I said, swallowing the emotion behind those words. I wore a forest green sweater. I'd been saving one that brought out the grey in my hair and the softness in my eyes. I brought my famous cranberry orange muffins and a bottle of white wine. When I arrived, Carrie greeted me at the door with a cautious smile. Michael stood in the hallway behind her, holding their dog in his arms, as if the familiarity of it might soften the tension in the air. Dinner was lovely, awkward in parts, but real. We talked about old family stories, laughed at Fiway. The turkey came out a little too dry, passed dishes back and forth like we hadn't tipped through a minefield just weeks earlier. At one point, Carrie got up to refill drinks and left me alone with Michael in the kitchen. We didn't touch, we didn't sing goodbye. To thank you for coming, he said quietly, his eyes filled with something like peace. Thank you for making room, I said. He nodded, and for the first time I sensed it was ready to step back, not out of fear, but out of respect for Carrie, for me, for all that had been. After dessert, as we stood in the doorway saying goodbye, Carrie wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. Mom, she said, pulling back just enough to look in my eyes. I know things can't go back to how they were, but I'm glad you're still here, that you're still you. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I kissed her cheek. I'm always her conclusion. The drive home, I rolled down the window slightly and let the cold air hit my face. The sky was a dark velvet blue dotted with early stars. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt Ernest Michael. And I still speak now. And then a message, a thoughtful article shared Akakin about how Carrie's doing, but that chapter of whatever asterisk we asterisk were. It's over now, not with regret, but with reverence we step into something extraordinary. And we stepped out with our hearts. Intactive learns something through all of this life. Doesn't always hand you neat resolutions. It gives you contradictions and it dares you to sit with them, to live in the grey, to let go of shame and embrace complexity. I've made mistakes. I've hurt someone I love, but I've also rediscovered who I am, a woman not defined by age or loss or sacrifice, but by the simple, beautiful truth that she still feels deeply. To anyone who's reading this or listening, or maybe just quietly wondering how you got here, don't lose yourself in the roles others assign to you. You are allowed to feel, to want to change, and maybe, just maybe, to start over even if it's not the way you imagined.